Life in the village was hard, but it was home. Emma's family lived on the edge of survival, with her parents toiling endlessly on other people's farmland. They had no land of their own, no savings, and no certainty about where the next meal would come from. Yet, despite the hardships, they clung to hope that one day, God would answer their prayers. Emma, their first daughter, had finished secondary school 2 years earlier, but there was no money to send her to college. She helped her parents in the fields and dreamed of a life beyond the endless rows of cassava and corn. That hope came one sunny morning when David, a distant cousin, arrived in the village. He drove a sleek, black car that sparkled under the sun, and the villagers gathered around it in awe. David was wealthy, confident, and carried himself with the air of someone who had seen the world. He told stories of his life in the city, where opportunities abounded and poverty was a distant memory. To Emma and her family, he seemed like a savior sent by God. During his visit, David made a life-changing offer. He promised to take Emma to the city, enroll her in a good school, and give her a better life. "She's a smart girl," he said. "She deserves a chance." Her parents were overjoyed. They thanked him profusely, not considering the risks of sending their young daughter away. Emma's beauty had started to bloom, and her figure was attracting attention, but in their excitement, her parents dismissed any concerns. This was their chance to escape poverty through their daughter. The news spread like wildfire. Emma was going to the city. For days, neighbors and relatives came to congratulate her family. Some brought small gifts, others whispered warnings about sending a girl to live with a man. Before I continue, if you like to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. But her parents brushed off the concerns. David was family, and he had promised to care for Emma as if she were his own daughter. When the day came for her to leave, Emma hugged her parents tightly, tears streaming down her face. She promised to study hard and return with enough money to change their lives. Her mother held her face and said, "God has heard our prayers. Don't forget where you come from, my child." With those words ringing in her ears, Emma climbed into David's car and watched her village disappear in the rearview mirror. The city was everything Emma had dreamed of and more. Tall buildings towered over bustling streets filled with people who seemed to be in constant motion. David spared no expense in transforming her life. He bought her new clothes, changed her hairstyle, and even gave her an Android phone. For the first time, Emma felt like she belonged in a world of privilege and opportunity. David enrolled her in a prestigious school, and she quickly became one of the top students. Her days were filled with classes and assignments, while her evenings were spent imagining a future where she could lift her family out of poverty. She dreamed of buying her parents a large piece of land and helping them farm it. She imagined her younger siblings attending school without worrying about fees. Life finally felt full of promise. For a year, everything seemed perfect. David treated her like family, or so she thought. He was attentive and caring, often bringing her gifts and encouraging her studies. Emma began to trust him completely, seeing him as the reason her life had turned around. That Christmas, David took Emma back to the village. She came bearing gifts, clothes, shoes, and jewelry, all purchased by David. Her parents were overwhelmed with gratitude. They praised God for his mercy and David for his generosity. Emma's mother wept openly, thanking David for giving her daughter a chance at life. The villagers, too, were amazed at Emma's transformation. She looked like someone from the city, with polished manners and a confident air. They whispered among themselves, marveling at how quickly her life had changed. But as Emma's family celebrated, a shadow loomed over her future. She didn't know it yet, but David's intentions were far from pure. Shortly after their return to the city, David's cook, Mrs. Miller, fell ill and passed away. With no one to prepare meals, Emma took over the kitchen duties. At first, it felt natural. She had always helped her mother cook back in the village, but soon, David's behavior began to change. One evening, as Emma stood in the kitchen stirring a pot of rice stew, she felt David's eyes on her. His gaze lingered in a way that made her uncomfortable. At first, she dismissed it. He was her uncle, her benefactor. Surely, he meant no harm, but his compliments grew more personal. "You're growing into a beautiful woman," he said one evening, his eyes scanning her in a way that made her skin crawl. She laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond. Then came the day that changed everything. Emma was cutting vegetables when David approached her from behind. What started as an innocent hug quickly turned into something else. His hands wandered, and his words sent a chill down her spine. "I want you," he whispered. Emma froze, her heart pounding in terror. She pulled away. But David was relentless. He threatened to stop paying her tuition and send her back to the village. "After all I've done for you," he said, his voice cold and manipulative. Emma was torn. She wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but she also thought of her parents. She thought of the sacrifices they had made for her, the hope they had pinned on her future. With tears streaming down her face, she gave in, convincing herself it would be a one-time thing. It wasn't a one-time thing. From that night on, David called her to his room whenever he desired. Emma lived with a growing sense of shame and guilt. She excelled in her studies, graduating as a pharmacist, but inside, she felt broken, even after completing her education. She couldn't bring herself to leave David's house. She was trapped emotionally and mentally. David had severed ties with his other partners, and Emma became the sole object of his twisted attention. Emma often found herself lost in thought. Haunted by the choices she had been forced to make, she wondered what David still wanted from her. Wasn't her silence, her compliance, enough? She dreamed of breaking free but felt shackled by fear and guilt. Back in the village, her parents still saw David as a savior. They didn't know the truth. How could she tell them? How could she shatter their belief that God had answered their prayers through him? One day, while sitting alone in her room, Emma stumbled upon an old photograph of her family. It was a picture of her parents standing proudly in front of their small, weathered hut. She remembered their sacrifices, their prayers, and their unwavering belief in her. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of courage. Emma began to plan her escape. She reached out to a former classmate who had become a social worker, confiding in her about everything she had endured. Together, they devised a plan to help Emma leave David's house and start a new life. When the day finally came, Emma packed her belongings and left while David was away on a business trip. She moved into a shelter for women and began counseling sessions to heal from her trauma. Slowly, she started rebuilding her life. Months later, Emma returned to the village, this time on her own terms. She gathered her parents and siblings and told them everything. They were devastated but stood by her side, offering their support and love. Emma's journey was far from over, but she had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. She vowed to use her story to help other young girls avoid the traps she had fallen into. Her pain became her purpose, and her scars became a testament to her strength.